Okay, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law. We're doing chapter 38, and we're up to number 13. So this chapter, we're discussing different things prepared by a non-Jewish person that makes it not kosher. So bread, we discussed the things that were cooked. And we just started discussing milk at the end of last week. So let's start the milk again. We'll have a recap, and then we'll finish it off. So the other things that we had, for example, bread of a non-Jew, it's even talking about when the bread is totally kosher. But there was concern of intermarriage, right? If we eat in other people's, in non-Jewish people's homes, and we have that level of relationship, then chas v'shalom can lead to intermarriage and various things. The milk, though, is a totally separate issue. The milk is primarily a kashrus issue. So, in the olden times, people, they had pigs on farms. This was what they used as their garbage disposal unit. People didn't have garbage collection. They didn't have flush sewage. They didn't have waste disposal units, different things. So the pigs took care of all their garbage. So people had pigs. Farmers often had pigs. Now, also pre-refrigeration, it was very common to mix a little bit of pig milk into the cow or sheep, whatever other milk it is, because only kosher milk turns into cheese. Only milk from a kosher animal curdles and turns into cheese. Non-kosher animals, it doesn't happen. So by putting a little bit of pig milk, it helps preserve a little bit longer the cow milk. So it's a common thing done. So with that in mind, let's start 13, Yud Gimel, chapter 38, paragraph 13. If a non-Jew milked an animal, even a kosher animal, and there was not a Jew watching, so the decree that the sages made was that a Jew has to watch the milking to ensure that it's only kosher milk. So if it was milked without a Jew watching, also this milk is forbidden even to make cheese. As we said, cheese cannot be made out of non-kosher animals, but even to make cheese is concerned because we're worried it could be a mixture. And let's say it's 90% kosher animal milk, it could still make cheese. So we can't use this milk at all, not to drink, not to put in cereal, not to cook with, not to make cheese. Now, in the ideal world, a Jew had to be there from before they started the milking, from the first moment they started. Why? The Yira Kali Shunaki, to check the bucket or whatever they're milking into, that it's clean. There's nothing else. There's not already pig milk or something in there. And this a custom. It's not a halachic requirement. So we do this in the first instance, is we do not milk into a utensil that non-Jews milk into. Okay, so that's what we got up to last week. Continues, you have non-Jewish help, and they're milking in a Jew's house, a Jew's property. So or in the Jew's barn. So you have in your own barn, you only have kosher animals. And this person is milking there. So kol mokim shem beis nochri mafsik, as long that the house of the non-Jew does not obstruct the milking, and there's no concern of a non-kosher animal. So if you also have a non-kosher animal, if you have a horse in your barn, so then we're concerned. Maybe they're going to mix in horse milk. Who knows? But if there's no non-kosher animals. And there's nothing obstructing your view, even though you can't see into the barn, but you could see who goes in and out, and you could see if they bring something in that shouldn't be there. So if you have an unobstructed view of the barn, and beforehand you knew there was nothing in there that was not kosher, you're allowed to, even the first instance, to let them do the milking. I will in-base Nochri Mafsik, but if the non-Jew's house or anything else for that matter obstructs the view of the barn, Sarch Yesham Yisrael, there has to be a Jew there because we need to have it supervised. Now, even though we need a Jewish person there to supervise, but feel cotton or katana b'netesha shonim sagi. Even the child of 9 years old is sufficient. In other words, they don't have to be an adult. It doesn't have to be someone who's bar mitzvah. It can even be someone, because the main point can be a child of 9 years and up. We need a child that will understand the difference. They recognize the animals, they know what's going on, and they understand to tell their parents if someone brings in something they shouldn't, and that's sufficient. So that's the basic halacha. So what a Jew can never do, they're never allowed to, there's no leniency whatsoever, is to just go to a non-Jewish farm and buy some milk. Right? They're selling milk that they milked on their farm. It's forbidden for a Jew to buy this milk. Now, that's called chalav akum. It's a Jew milk that a non-Jew produced, and we have no idea what's in it. And when a Jew supervised or milked it themselves, that's called chalav Yisrael, a Jew's milk, and that we are assured of the kashrus. Today, there's discussion about commercially produced milk, something that wasn't around in the past. So in Reb Moshe Feinstein, when he discusses this milk in his responsa, he calls this cholav hacompanies, right? The essentially commercially produced milk. Okay, some more modern authorities have given a new title, cholav stam. Okay, now the borrowed this term from wine, because in wine, when we get up to that chapter, we'll see there's yain nesach, there's real wine that has been used for idol worship or strongly suspected. There's kosher wine, and then there's wine yain stam. It's wine that has no designation, hasn't been used. So they borrow that term, even though there's no precedent for it in halacha till then. So it's a bit of a made up term, really has no significance. So we'll just call the cholav companies, the commercially produced milk. That's I think it makes far more sense. So Reb Moshe wanted to build on what we said here. In other words, we gave a situation where it's your barn. So in other words, you know that there's no non-kosher animals, and you have an unobstructed view. So you have a way of knowing that this non-Jew did not bring in anything not kosher. And so even though you didn't see the actual milking, you just saw the situation, and your supervision on a superficial level helps ensure nothing non-kosher is brought in. That's good enough. So he wants to build on that and say that today, with commercial milk plants, they have these massive farms. There's really only cows there. It's not like an old, mom and pop farm that had all different animals. There's just 10,000 cows, and that's it, pretty much. And they have to do testing to see what type of milk it is. And when it gets delivered to its source, they test it. And if someone mixes in something they're not meant to, they get fined and various things. So Rav Moshe wants to say that this milk is considered as if a Jew watched it. So since we have these other ways to ensure that nothing non-kosher was mixed in, that's good enough. And that's why you see various milk that is not specific Chol Yisrael, has a OU on it or something, and that's their reasoning. In practice, I don't think it's so simple. Several reasons. Number one is that Moshe himself, when he gave this leniency, he only said b'shas chak, a time of great need. So, time of great need, if you look, when do you write this? In the 60s, you can, Chol Yisrael is more available in Phoenix today than it was even available in New York in the 60s, right? So in other words, today in many places, wherever there's an established community, it's readily available. It's not difficult to get. It might take a little more organizing. It might cost a few more dollars, but it's readily available. He was writing about people who lived in places like Phoenix in the 60s. If you didn't have cholesterol, you didn't get milk. So that's number one. Number two, b'shas chak might mean certain dairy products for your health. I don't think time of need requires a person to have chocolates and desserts and various things. So even though people eat this, they say, yeah, we rely on Reb Moshe. But if they've actually read Reb Moshe Feinstein's response on it, he only ever says b'shas chak. And there's actually more than one letter, because he then wrote a clarification. And in his clarification, he said he did not mean that yeshivas should start using this to save money. It's only when people don't have nutrition available in out-of-town places. And he said, but B'nai Torah, people who have yeshiva background, people who are visible as religious Jews, they should have Mesiras Nefesh, because you need to show a certain example. So in many communities today, this attitude of like it's just Chol Yisrael is a stringency and you can have whatever you like, really is not the case. So that's situation number one. Now, this is all presuming that Reb Moshe's proposition holds water, right? Now, obviously, I'm not going to argue with Moshe Feinstein, but there's a few issues I think to consider. Number one is that there is discussion in the Rishonim. What exactly was the decree of Chol Yisrael? So there's two views. View number one is that it's to ensure the milk is kosher. Okay, so if that's the reason, then there's room to say if we could ensure a different way, then that might also work. But there's another view. The other view is, yes, they originally made the decree because they had a concern about other milk being mixed in. But once the decree was made, it's irrelevant whether we know from some other way. The decree was a Jew has to watch. So if a Jew didn't watch, it's considered totally treif, just like a piece of pig. So we have these two views. And in one of the clarification letters, Rav Moshe says he accepts that his response, his leniency, only goes like one of these views, right? Because the other view, that the reasoning for the original decree is irrelevant, it doesn't help that we know some other way. So that's point number one. Point number two is, each one of us here, whether retired or working, even when we did work, we worked in different industries. But I can tell you like this: I've worked in many schools, and particularly in Australia, where there's a lot of government oversight, but also in America, if you have a UK, have certain programs, preschool programs, there's certain government oversight, various things. I can tell you like this: the way the place runs when the government inspectors are there is not always the way it runs when they're not there. And I'm sure most industries are the same. So to say that all the testing is always done and they always keep records and they always report on things that look funny, because if they don't, an inspector's going to pick it up on his inspection once in a while, I don't know if that you can necessarily rely on that, because the way places run the day the inspector's there is not necessarily the way they run when the inspectors are not there. We had a situation once in camp, and the camp, we ran out of milk, and the delivery was only available to come not the following day, but the day after. So we needed to get milk for one day. So the camp, it's in the country, so we found a farm, and we organized the milking. We watched the milking, and we had our own milk. So the farmer, with no understanding of kashrus or what we were doing, he just thought that we were some camp, wanted to see milking cows, and he didn't really know what was the significance. He just in conversation said, if you would have come yesterday or 2 days ago, whatever it was, he said you would have got really good milk. So one of my friends says, yeah, what was so good about the other milk? He says, because I'd mixed a bit of pig milk into it, and it makes it delicious. Right. So I said, aren't you worried about getting caught? Because you're not allowed to do that. And he says, no. He was like showing how his farm is on the top of a hill, and he has a view of the whole road for miles and miles coming his direction. He said, if any inspectors come, I can see them miles away. And so I'm not worried about anything. I take care of whatever I need to take care of. So again, perhaps even relying on the government to do this work for us is a little naive. That's that. Just point out a story of the Aruch HaShulchan, right? The Aruch HaShulchan, one of the major commentaries on Shulchan Aruch, it's normally printed in its own set of books. So in these laws, he writes an incident. He writes a story of there was a certain Jew that at home he was very careful of Chol Yisrael, of course, but he used to travel, and I think from memory, the Aruch HaShulchan says he used to go to France for business. And while he was there, he would drink coffee in the coffee houses, and he wasn't so careful about the milk that they put into it. And one time he's having the coffee, and the coffee is like really good. And he goes to the owner, and again, the owner maybe wasn't even aware the fellow was Jewish. He certainly had no understanding of kashrus. And he just asked him, he says, the coffee is really good today. What's the secret recipe of this coffee? So he says that he boiled the milk in animal bones, with animal bones in it, and that makes it tastier, right? So this was absolute treif. This is milk and meat cooked together. This is terrible. So besides the fact that Chol Yisrael is its own reasoning, sometimes just following the decrees of our sages protects us from other things as well. So I'm not going to say to you that the other products are treif, they're totally not kosher, but certainly I don't think in good conscience you could advise anyone to eat them. And I highly, highly recommend that people only consume products that are specifically made to be Chol Yisrael. Okay, so that's the milk. So 14, now we're going to discuss cheese. So as we said, cheese cannot be made from the milk of a non-kosher animal. So seemingly, there shouldn't be any concern buying cheese, seemingly. Bat 14. Gevinus nachrim asurois. Cheese produced by non-Jews is forbidden. But if a Jew watched the milking and he watched the making of the cheese, meaning the initial step, and then they lock it up to age, then if during the process the cheese was owned by a Jew, maturos, then it's kosher, meaning the aging process, because since it's owned by the Jew, he bought the rights to this batch. The non-Jew is not going to do anything to it. Then it's allowed. But if the cheese still belongs to the non-Jew and there's no supervision during the time it's aging, then asuris is forbidden, right? And the reason that we have this concern is that even though cheese can only be made from the milk kosher animal, but we are concerned that it may be a mixture. Let's say 90% kosher milk, 10% non-kosher milk, and you can still make the cheese. Now, possibly an absolute cheese expert will be able to tell the difference, that it's not fully cheesed, it's somewhat moist in a way it's not meant to be. But for us regular people, it's going to be impossible. So the way they make commercial cheese today, when it's non-Jewish company and they're doing batches, so if you have a Jewish company, it's all yours. Chavisor milk, Jewish workers or supervisors, and it goes fine. But often people goes to cheese makers and they make chavisor batches. So what do? They bring the chavisor milk, they watch it, the initial process, and then it gets left to age, and then they lock it up. And they lock it. And although it has to be checked from time to time, and mashgiach comes from the checking from time to time, and it's locked up essentially until it's aged properly, and then it's ready to be used. Okay, any questions on the milk or the cheese? No, so now we're going to discuss butter. So butter technically, again, can really only be made from a kosher animal. And although a decree was made about cheese, non-Jewish cheese, the same decree was not made about butter. So how does it work with butter? 15. Hachema, butter. Talia b'minig ha'mekomus. This depends on the custom of the place. There are certain places that they are accustomed. They do not eat, they do not consume the butter produced by non-Jews. And there are those that do. Someone who lived in a place where they did eat butter from a non-Jew, and so he did, and now he moves to a place. Sorry, he lived in a place where they didn't, so he never did, and now he moved to a place where they do. Even though he's intending to return to his place, he's allowed to eat it. And a person who travels from a place, he lived in a place where they did eat it, and now he lives in a place where they don't, also he shouldn't eat it there. So this was something in Europe that was really different customs. There were many places where they did eat butter that was produced by non-Jews. So he says in brackets, he said there's a rumor that they sometimes smear the cheese with lard from a pig. So therefore you should refrain the butter to make it shiny, different things. So you should be careful not to use it. So I know growing up in Australia, in Sydney, although there was Chol Yisrael milk available, so you get it once a week. There used to be a milking once a week, and they did import haphazardly cheese. But butter, people used to use, even the very from people used to use the regular butter. As we see, it's not really so much of an issue, relatively speaking. Later on, like around the time I got married, they'll start to import the Chol Yisrael Pacific butter. And the truth is, over time, very few people started to use butter. Most people use margarine, different things or other options. And so it's not so much an issue today. There's plenty of other options. That's how it used to go. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so now we're going to start chapter 39. So we're starting to get into the laws of meals. So the next chapter, we're going to talk about washing for bread. So we're presuming that the meal is going to be based, you're going to make a motzi, it's a proper meal. So this chapter is going to be if you want to eat or drink something before the meal. So, sometimes people come to a meal and before the meal, there's hors d'oeuvres, there's various things. So since you're planning to wash and have a motzi and different things, so how does it work with these hors d'oeuvres? We'll see a few issues, blessings, and before blessing is not so much an issue, but after blessing, do you make an after blessing because you're planning to continue to eat in a moment with the meal? So these are the type of issues we're going to discuss. So chapter 39, Siman Lamed Tes, Din mi sheroitz le'echol or lishtois koydem asuda. Someone who wants to eat or drink something before the meal. Okay, so Aleph, number one. Haroitz le'echol koydem atilis yadayim, devarim she'achim eminim elo gam b'seich asuda. So before you wash for the meal, so you're going to wash shortly, let's say in half an hour. I just made up that time frame, doesn't have to be that. And you're going to sit down, make a motzi, and you're going to have this proper meal. But you want to eat some of the things that you're going to eat at the meal. So at the meal, they're going to have chicken. And now they're serving these little chicken poppers, these little nuggets or whatever, as an hors d'oeuvre. So whether these are foods that you have to make a blessing during a meal, if you're going payers, for example, fruit. So fruit, you're meant to make its own blessing if you have it in the middle of the meal. Or whether it's an item that you don't make its own bracha during the meal once you've washed. Going, for example, mini lifta, mini kidneys, the puchedama. You have different relishes or beans or potatoes. So these things that are like side dishes to the meal. So you don't make a blessing. The part of the actual meal. Likewise, if you want to have some drink, except for wine. Wine, we're going to see, has its own rules. Until you dying before you wash. So again, it's let's just use an example. People go to a wedding, and sometimes before the wedding, they've got like they put out some cake, they put out some different foods, and there's soda and various things, maybe some l'chaim. And also, you're planning to have some more of this during the meal. So you're going to have some l'chaim during the meal as well. So, yesh bezer machlokes haposkim. There becomes a dispute amongst the sages about the following point. Im hadavarim she'achol b'seich hasuda. Sorry, skipped the line. Im hadavarim she'achol ashasa koydem tis yadayim. If these things that you're going to eat or drink before washing, does your benching at the end of the meal count for these foods, even though you ate them before you started the official meal? Or do these foods, does the benching, does the grace after meals, after you're going to say after the full meal, not help? And therefore you have to make your own blessing. So again, let's keep it simple. Let's give a practical example. As an hors d'oeuvre pre-meal, so when in pre-meal hors d'oeuvre, they're serving chicken nuggets. Right? He's got chicken nuggets. And he's going to be eating more chicken during the meal. The main course is chicken. So obviously a before blessing is to make, because he didn't wash and he didn't start the Suda yet, didn't start the meal. So on these chicken nuggets he's having as an hors d'oeuvre, he has to make a blessing before he eats them. Now, let's presume he ate a few pieces, so he's eaten enough to make an after blessing. Now comes the dispute. Does the benching he's going to do at the end of the meal, after he washes and makes a motzi and eats the main course of chicken, since it's going on that chicken that he's having at the meal, does that benching, this is grace after meals, also go on this chicken he had pre-meal, or does it not? Therefore, he has to make a after blessing before he washes and starts the meal. And we have a dispute amongst the halachic authorities. So, since this dispute, what do we do? And therefore, so for those just joined us, Siman Namates, chapter 39, in Aleph, we're in the middle of number 1. And therefore, you should avoid it. Don't eat it. Eating things before the meal, putting yourself in a situation that you might have to say an after blessing. Or if you do, and you make an after blessing, don't eat that kind of food during the meal. So back to our example. If you know the main course is chicken, don't eat chicken for hors d'oeuvres. It's going to get problem. Just eat the other hors d'oeuvres, which is sushi, which is not serving during the meal. And then you can make an after blessing on the sushi, and there's no problem because it's not going to be eaten in the meal. And there's no question of an after blessing then. And then problem is solved. Or if you do eat the chicken and you'd end up making an after blessing to be on the safe side, then when it comes to the main course and they give you the option, chicken or beef, at the wedding, take the beef, don't eat chicken. So that way you avoid the question, right? The question is only if you're eating now the same food, you're going to eat the same type of food, you're going to eat during the meal. That's when, as an hors d'oeuvre to the meal, that's when it becomes a question. So we can avoid this situation by either not having hors d'oeuvres, the same type of food that's going to be eaten during the meal, or if we do, avoid eating it during the meal. And the same applies to the drinks. Now, v'im loy barach dechila b'achachronim. And if you don't say the after blessing, then you can say the after blessing. Remember, again, we're talking about the food that it's now different food. I had the chicken nuggets as the hors d'oeuvre before washing, and I only had the beef in the main course in the meal. I didn't have any chicken. So there's no question the benching does not go on the nuggets. So now I can say the after blessing on these nuggets even after I washed if I forgot. Ideally, I should make it before I wash. But if afterwards, I can make it afterwards. Or even after benching, I can still say it if it wasn't too long time that passed. However, if you ended up eating some of it during the meal, right? You weren't aware of this issue until afterwards. Mid-meal, you realized it was an issue. So you had chicken nuggets. And now you had some schnitzel at the main course, which is the big chicken nugget, right? What should you do then? Again, to get out of the question, did the benching help on your chicken nuggets? If it did, you don't need to make an after blessing. But if it didn't, you do. So what do? After benching, eat something else that has the same after blessing. So I'll bench and afterwards have a chocolate, bar of chocolate, obviously, because we had chicken. But it's got the same after blessing as the chicken nuggets. And then when I say the after blessing on the par of chocolate, I have in mind the chicken nuggets that I ate before as an hors d'oeuvre. And I've ended up exempting, I've taken care of the food that I ate before washing. Yeah, David.
But are you saying a bracha rishona on the chocolate?
No, I mean, so what happened is we're saying, yeah, I mean, you're eating chocolate after benching, so you need to make a blessing on it. And if you eat enough of it, then you're gonna need to make an after blessing. And once you're making the after blessing on the chocolate, you can have in mind the chicken nuggets. So that's food and drink other than wine. So let's summarize it. The question only arises is if the hors d'oeuvre, food or drink, is the same as what you're going to eat during the meal. If it's different, totally different. They're serving sushi for hors d'oeuvres and then they're going to wash and they're eating roast beef. There's no question. You make an after blessing on your sushi. The benching of the meal does not go on the sushi because you didn't have any during the meal. It's only an issue if it's the same food. Chicken nuggets for hors d'oeuvres, schnitzel for the meal. So it's the same food. So it puts you in a question of doubt. Did you have to make an after blessing before you wash or not? So in the first instance, we should try and avoid the doubt by either making sure that we eat something different for the hors d'oeuvres or eat something different during the meal. But if we didn't, after the fact, we've eaten the same type of food. So then the way we deal with the situation is after we bench, after we have the meal, we make a blessing on something else, we eat something else that has a similar after blessing as the hors d'oeuvres, and we have them both in mind. So that was food and beverages other than wine. In number 2, base, we're going to discuss wine. Wine has its own importance and therefore has slightly different rules. Base, number 2. Right, so again, we got the hors d'oeuvres and we got some wine. We're drinking some wine before the meal. Then even if you are not gonna have more wine during the meal, the only wine was before the meal. Nevertheless, Yesh Oimrim, though those that say, since wine before a meal opens the stomach and encourages appetite, so it's a benefit to the meal. Therefore, it's considered part of the meal, even though it was pre-meal. Whatever you drank pre-meal is considered part of the meal, and the benching that you make on the meal goes on the wine. And this is similar. It's not the exact same reason, but similar to when we make kiddush before we wash. Here, we're not drinking the wine in order to open our stomach and build appetite. We're making it as a blessing of the day for the meal, but it's a prelude to the meal. So even though we're drinking the wine before we washed, before we made hamotzi, the benching covers this wine even if we don't drink further wine during the meal. So a similar concept, a slightly different reason, but similar concept. If we drink before the meal as like hors d'oeuvres to help, gets the appetite going, then we have a view that the benching helps. V'yesh omrim, and then we have almost the opposite view. The film shoyse yain gamba suda. Even if you drank more wine during the meal, we call mocking nevertheless. The benching does not help wine you had before the meal. So again, conflicting opinions. And therefore, a person should avoid drinking wine before washing. Unless he's also going to drink after benching. Have a nightcap after dinner. Or you're going to bench on the cup and drink the cup and or drink the contents of the cup, not the cup, right? And have to make a blessing afterwards. Shevarach al acharav al gefen. Then you have to make the special after blessing on the wine. And then when you do that, you have in mind what you had before the meal. Now, if you want to drink liquor, so alcoholic beverages other than wine before the meal, then the law is irrelevant if you're drinking more during the meal or you're not drinking more during the meal. You have to drink less than a kazayas, which is a revius, like is about 85 mils, 87 mils, to avoid the issue. I will im shasa kazayas a yoisa, not for the suffix barachroina. But once you drink more than that, it puts you in the same situation of, do I have to make an after blessing or not? And so it'll be the same idea. You should eat something after the meal or drink something after the meal. That's the same after blessing, right? But if you go to a wedding and you say l'chaim to someone at the Kabbalah's Ponim, and it's just a small cup, normally some people drink big l'chaims, but if your normal regular shot cup is much less than a kazayas, then it's not going to be a concern. Okay. Gimel, number 3. You want it before the meal, you want to eat things that are mazoinus blessing. Could go in ugas davash. He's giving an example, honey cake. So again, let's use a wedding example. Before the meal, they have a little something. They put out some hors d'oeuvres and there's cake and there's drink. Yes, David.
You're saying a kazayas of wine. I thought a kazayas is for
so he says kazayas.
solid
Kazayas
foods.
and revius are the same thing, because a revius of liquid that congealed will be a kazayas. So sometimes they're used interchangeably.
Because a revius is going to be like 3.5 ounces, and a kazayas is going to be about an ounce.
Once it congeals, it gets smaller.
So in other
And liquid
words,
ounce, solid ounce is not the same measurement. But generally, if you take a revius and it becomes hard, you let it congeal. Not all liquids do that, but if it would, then it's the size of a kazayas.
Okay.
So a person beforehand, so he's at the wedding, is going to have these snacks beforehand, or person's at a kiddush, they have a kiddush right before the Shabbos meal. So he's going to eat honey cake or gusbeitzim, kadoma, or what we call an egg kichel, right? It's shabracha achroyin shlem hi ala michya, that the after blessing is ala michya. Now, bain shachol mehem gamasei chasuda, irrelevant as to whether he's planning to eat more of it during the meal, bain shloyach mehem chasuda, or whether he's not. Nevertheless, the benching works for these foods. It goes on this food. Because mazoinus is considered food of substance. It's meal food. So even though you had it as an hors d'oeuvre, as a a pre-meal food, but it's meal type enough that it still works. Why? So in the brackets, kibirchas and mos and b'teres gam alamichia. Benching also fulfills your obligation of alamichia if you have to do both. The exception is you can't have too long a break. You can't have too long a break. So let's say you had a kiddush and shul, and you had mezainis, and then and you had in mind you're gonna eat the meal afterwards, because you normally have in mind planning to eat a meal afterwards. And right after the kiddush, you go to your house down the block and you wash, then it works. But if you have a kiddush and shul, and then you go home and you have a nap, and 2 hours later you wash, then the benching doesn't help what you ate before. So the it can't be too long a gap. He's not defining here how long it is, but it's normally between 18 minutes and half an hour. Different views. So if it's a long break, then sarach levarach dechila birchas al michya al mashachol. First, he has to make al michya on what he ate. Even if he's going to eat many of the same types of cake and cookie and various things, exact same things during the meal. Okay. So that's chapter 39. Okay. Chapter 40. Dov, you have a guest? You have to say hello.
My grandson.
What's his name?
What's your name? Avram Zev.
Oh, pleasure to meet you.
we see you.
Zevi.
Pleasure to meet you,
hello.
Zevi.
Hello.
Say hello, Zevi. Put your face in there.
Hello, Zevi.
Hello. Okay. Chapter 40. Washing our hands for the meal. So there's quite a few laws about washing our hands. And the first thing, just to give an introduction, when we wash our hands today for a meal, this is the Rabbanon. It's a decree from the sages. Now, again, like we said, like many decrees of the sages, it's from almost normally it's biblical times. It's from Talmudic times, from early Mishnaic times. Why do we wash our hands? So there were times where we would eat, if we're a kohen, we could eat truma, we could eat other holy foods. And to do that, not only did we necessarily have to, sometimes we had to go to mikveh and various things, but also before we touched it, we had to make sure that our hands, there was no tumah on our hands. So we have to wash our hands. When, unfortunately, these things didn't become, particularly truma, do not become relevant, or so it's not relevant, it's not doable, because a kohen today can't eat truma because he's come in contact with a deceased, or at least a second degree, someone who has been in contact with the deceased. And we don't have the paraduma, the red heifer, to make ourselves toher. So we're worried that this law may get forgotten. Because we're worried it may be forgotten, we brought in that everyone should wash their hands before a meal. And this is going to remind us that there's such a thing. So that's the background. Now, why is it important to know this? Because if it was real truma, let's say kohen eating truma, there's essentially no leniencies. If for some reason he can't wash, bad luck. Don't eat truma. But because this is rabbanon, obviously under normal circumstances, there's not exceptions. But we will learn that there are certain leniencies, since it's washing the rabbanon, the rabbinic decree, if the circumstances are highly unusual. Right. So, and we'll discuss that when we get to it. So, chapter 40, Hilchon Nesilas Yadayim L'Suda, washing our hands for a meal. Aleph, number 1, Haroitze lechol pash mavarchim alav hamoitzi. Someone wants to eat bread that has the blessing hamoitzi on it. Sarech little yadav mekoidim, he first has to wash his hands. That's number 1. Even if he's having a minute amount, he has to wash his hands. Im pas gadol kabeitza, if he's going to eat a piece the size of an egg, then not only has to wash, but mavarech al natila, he also has to make a blessing on the washing. But punktus mezeh, baby's going to have less than this. He's only going to eat one tiny little piece, one mouthful. He doesn't want to eat bread, but his daughter brought him round this delicious sourdough that she baked, and he just wanted to taste one little piece. So he's not having the size of an egg, so he's not making a blessing, but he still has to wash. But ein mavarchim al natila, he doesn't make a blessing on this washing. So that's number 1. Any bread, you have to wash.
The blessing that he doesn't say is the washing blessing, not the motzi blessing.
Correct. Yeah, the washing blessing. Doesn't make a blessing on the washing if it's less than an egg-sized piece of bread he's going to eat. Base number 2. Natilas yadayim sarachlios davka min hakli. This washing has to specifically, it must be from a halachically acceptable utensil. And we're going to define that in this chapter. Probably not going to get to all today. But he has to be from a utensil. Like he can't just put his hands under running water, or he can't just wash his hands in a bowl. It has to be poured from a utensil, and the utensil also has requirements. So those who just joined us, Siman Mem, chapter 40, base number 2. Sarak shiyeh hakli shalim. The utensil has to be whole. Bli shum nekev, it can't have a hole in it, or sedek mafulish, or open cracks. The gum, so not only can't have holes or cracks, the maili shava bli shum choretz or blitum. The top level has to be without grooves or any projections. So sometimes you buy a pitcher, like a jug for your juice or something, and there's like the lip on the top. It has a bit that comes out to help you pour. Like has a protrusion. I'm not really sure what it's called, but
Spout?
Spout. Yeah, it's probably has some type of spout. So you can't use a cup with a spout. So these containers or pitchers that have a spout protruding above the edge, the lip of the vessel, that you pour through it, you cannot wash your hands for hamoitzi through the spout. Kisham ein loy dinkli, because such a vessel does not have the halachic categorization of a keli, of a utensil. Why? Because that piece is considered a separate piece, and that piece cannot hold enough liquid for you to wash. So if that's the only vessel you have to wash from the other side. The other side that contains the liquid. Yeah.
Is it because it's makabel tuma? That it poses, that it carries tuma? Is that basically why?
Okay, that's not the issue here. Now, any vessel can be makabel tuma. And that's now a separate issue. Pretty much all our kalim are going to be tome if you've been to a funeral and different things. So that's
here it's a keli. Here it's a keli that's between the
Correct.
keli and your
Right.
hand.
But that's what I was saying. But here, what we have is this, it's a separate issue, is that we're saying the spout is like a separate keli, separate utensil to the cup. And it's not big enough to hold the amount of liquid required. So it would be a little bit like instead of washing from the cup, you put in a spoon and you poured water from the spoon onto your hand. So the spoon is not large enough. It doesn't take enough water. So that even though the spout is connected to the utensil, it's considered a separate utensil. Okay. Gimel, number 3. Klishen yachala amoid. Any utensil that cannot freestand, it can't stand on its own. You have to lean it against something. So it's got like a cone shape or something. It doesn't stand. If it was made to be like that, in other words, if it was deliberately made to be like that, that's how you use this type of utensil, is through leaning. Then yesh lo din keli, then it's considered a utensil, because that's what it's designed for. That's its purpose. Excuse me. Aval im loy nase l'shtamish boykach. If it wasn't made to be like that, could go in kisoy keli. For example, it's a lid. It's really made to be a lid. Or it broke. It doesn't use that example here, but I'm adding that in. A bit chipped, now doesn't stand properly on its own. Ein loy memenu. Now you can't wash from this utensil. The yesh zeh kama chaluki din b'Shulchan Aruch, and there's many details to this in Shulchan Aruch, in the full Shulchan Aruch. And therefore, a person should avoid it
Take
in
one more,
general.
though. One more. That'll be it. One more. So we get it. The more we get out, the better. Just one more.
Okay.
That'll be it.
So, any questions on that?
They didn't know about paper cups that have those cones that come out of the tubes.
The drink
next to the
machines,
water
yeah.
fountain. But the point is, you could use those because they
Well,
are
you
made to be
you
used that
probably,
way.
well, you couldn't, but not because of that reason. We've got other reasons. It's
Why you
not going to be. Usually they're very small.
right.
Usually they're
well,
very
we know-
small, so that'll be another problem. And usually also they're not properly waterproof. Like if you leave the water in a little bit, it starts to come through. It's only made for short-term use. So for a variety of reasons, they may not be called the kli. But in concept, let's say you did have one that was the cup. You know, it's like a non-edible ice cream cone. It's
No, I'm
designed
not
to
gonna
be
mention it.
made.
We're going to say after.
It's
I'll tell you why.
it's designed to be made as a
You-
cone shape. Then it would work. All right, I guess all we have time for today.
What's the difference
So,
between a keli and a kli?
Sorry.
What's the difference between a keli and a kli?
where you fill.
Just the structure of the sentence.
No, the word is the same.
Yeah, it's the same word. It's going to depend on
Well,
on
kli-
the dictic of the sentence as which version of the word you use.
right, kli is
Yeah,
more of an adjective.
it's just a grammatical.
A keli is a noun. A keli. Kli is a keli used for something. So if you had a washing cup, it would be kli rechitza, I guess. Or
Washing cup.
to wrap my fingers in school, it was kli chiskus. All right, thank you.
Like
All
kli
right.
cheres or something.
That's
Thank
it.
you, Rabbi.
So that would be an example. Yeah. So
Right,
wish everyone a
thank
wonderful
you,
week.
Rabbi.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
you.